The year was 2307, and Earth was in its death throes. The once thriving blue planet had been ravaged by centuries of overconsumption, climate collapse, and wars fought over dwindling resources. Humanity, fractured and desperate, had turned its gaze to the stars for salvation. It was in this grim context that Project Erebus was conceived, a last-ditch effort shrouded in secrecy, funded by shadowy coalitions, and aimed at the impossible, harnessing the anomalous energy emanating from a rogue exoplanet deep in the Kuiper Belt. The Erebus station was a marvel of engineering, though it inspired no awe. It was a cold, skeletal construct of interlocking corridors, laboratories, and containment chambers suspended in the void. Its very design betrayed its purpose: practical, unfeeling, and wholly alien to the concept of human warmth. The station orbited Omega 41, the exoplanet emitting an energy signature unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The energy promised limitless power, but it carried an unspoken threat, like a predator watching from the underbrush. Among the select crew sent to man Erebus Station was Dr. Evelyn Marks, a xenobiologist whose brilliance was matched only by her reputation for defying authority. Tall and gaunt from years spent in sterile laboratories, Evelyn was a woman of sharp angles, both in appearance and demeanor. She had studied Earth's last vestiges of biodiversity, desperate to preserve them against the planet's decline. But her research had led her here, to this godforsaken station, chasing the promise of survival. Evelyn's arrival was met by Commander Harlan Riggs, a man who seemed carved from stone. With a jawline like a hammer and eyes that never betrayed his thoughts, Riggs embodied discipline. He had survived countless missions in the harshest conditions Earth could offer, but even he could not hide his unease about Project Erebus. "This station is a coffin," Riggs muttered to Evelyn as they stood in the observation deck, staring out at Omega 41. The planet glowed faintly, its surface veined with pulsing light that seemed to breathe. "If the energy doesn't kill us, the isolation will," Evelyn smirked, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Let's hope the energy is worth dying for." The crew settled into the station with a regimented efficiency born of necessity. Scientists ran diagnostics on the siphoning equipment. Engineers reinforced containment units, and military personnel patrolled the corridors, their presence a constant reminder of the project's precarious nature. Omega 41's energy proved as volatile as it was tantalizing. It danced through the siphoning systems like liquid lightning, a force that defied classification. The researchers marveled at its potential, while the soldiers whispered of curses and omens. The first incident occurred 2 weeks after the station became operational. Marcus Lynn, a maintenance technician, was found in a trance-like state near the energy containment chamber. His hands pressed against the thick glass, and his eyes stared blankly at the undulating energy within. It took 3 soldiers to drag him away, and when he finally spoke, his words sent a shiver through the crew. "It's singing. Can't you hear it?" Evelyn examined Marcus in the station's infirmary, but her tests revealed nothing out of the ordinary. The incident was officially classified as stress-induced hallucination, though Evelyn wasn't convinced. She spent hours reviewing footage of the event, noting how Marcus had moved as if guided by an unseen hand. A disquieting thought took root in her mind. What if the energy wasn't just energy? What if it was alive? The station's logs soon filled with reports of odd occurrences. Crew members complained of hearing faint whispers in the dead of night, though the audio systems detected nothing. Others described fleeting shadows at the edges of their vision, only to find empty corridors when they turned. Riggs dismissed the accounts as paranoia, but Evelyn's skepticism wavered. One night, unable to sleep, Evelyn found herself drawn to the observation deck. Omega 41 loomed large in the viewport, its glow casting eerie patterns across the walls. She felt the hairs on her neck rise as she stared at the planet. It seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, a silent rhythm that resonated in her bones. "What do you see?" Riggs' voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, his imposing frame illuminated by the dim light. Evelyn hesitated. "I'm not sure, but whatever this is, it's not just a power source." It's something more. Riggs crossed his arms, his face impassive. And if you're right, what then? Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. The unspoken truth hung between them. If the energy was sentient, it would not be contained willingly. The tension aboard the station continued to build. Researchers pushed forward, their reports increasingly tinged with obsession as they sought to understand the energy's properties. The military personnel grew restless, their unease sharpening into hostility. And through it all, Omega 41 pulsed, its glow casting long shadows that seemed to stretch farther each day. Evelyn threw herself into her work, desperate to uncover the energy's secrets before it was too late. She analyzed its fluctuations, its patterns, and its interactions with the station's systems. The deeper she delved, the more she felt as though she was unraveling a language, a message encoded in light and vibration. But what it was trying to say, she couldn't yet discern. The tipping point came when Dr. Lal Tanner, one of the lead physicists, began exhibiting signs of paranoia. He claimed the energy was watching him, its patterns shifting whenever he entered the containment chamber. His colleagues dismissed him as overworked, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. Then one morning, Tanner was gone. His quarters were empty, his station untouched. The only clue to his disappearance was a single line scrawled on the wall of the containment chamber. "It sees us." As the crew scoured the station for Tanner, Evelyn found herself staring once more at the energy, its glow hypnotic and unrelenting. A sense of dread crept over her, a feeling she couldn't name but couldn't ignore. The whispers had grown louder. The shadows seemed bolder. And in her heart, Evelyn knew that whatever they had awakened on Omega 41, it was only just beginning. The disappearance of Dr. Tanner cast a long shadow over Erebus Station. His absence was a constant reminder that something aboard the station was slipping beyond their control. Official logs listed him as missing, but the crew had their own theories. Whispers of sabotage, desertion, and even possession echoed through the sterile halls. Yet no explanation accounted for the sense of dread that now clung to everyone like a second skin. Dr. Evelyn Marks had no time for speculation. She had been poring over weeks of data, deciphering the energy's patterns. The equations she once approached with cold logic now seemed alive, almost playful, shifting just when she thought she had grasped their meaning. She'd begun to recognize a terrifying consistency in the chaos. The energy was adapting to them. In the station's dimly lit mess hall, Evelyn sat across from Lieutenant Jenna Corrigan, one of Riggs' top soldiers. Jenna's hands trembled slightly as she sipped her coffee, her freckled face betraying the strain of endless patrols. "Another one's hearing whispers," Jenna murmured, keeping her voice low. "Petrov swears he heard his mother's voice calling him from the vent shafts." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And what did he find?" "Nothing. Just air ducts and dust." Jenna's gaze darted to the room's corners. "But you should have seen his face. He was pale like he'd seen something else." Before Evelyn could respond, the mess hall doors slid open with a hiss, and Commander Riggs entered, his expression grim. "Marks, with me." Evelyn followed Riggs to the observation deck, where the station's lead engineer, Dr. Anika Sorensen, waited. Sorensen was pale and visibly shaken, her usual precision dulled by fear. She gestured to the viewport, where Omega 41 loomed. Its glow had intensified, the veined patterns on its surface pulsating in what Evelyn could only describe as deliberate rhythms. "It's accelerating," Sorensen said, her voice tight. "The energy output is increasing exponentially. The containment systems are struggling to stabilize the siphoning equipment." Evelyn frowned. "Why now? What's changed?" Sorensen hesitated. "We've noticed anomalies. Data corrupted at random. Machinery malfunctioning without cause. I don't think it's mechanical error. It's as if the energy is pushing back. Pushing back." Riggs' voice was laced with disbelief. "It's energy, not an enemy combatant." Evelyn glanced at him. "Is it?" Tanner thought it was aware of us, and I'm starting to think he was right. Riggs didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the viewport, his jaw clenched. The silence between them was broken only by the faint hum of the station's systems. That night, the nightmares began. Evelyn woke drenched in sweat, the echoes of her dream clinging to her consciousness. She had seen a city of towering black spires, its skies filled with swirling light. The spires crumbled as a great wave of energy swept over them, consuming everything in its path. She could still hear the screams, layered and dissonant, as if an entire civilization had been silenced in an instant. The next morning, she wasn't the only one. Half the crew reported eerily similar dreams. The details varied, but the theme remained: annihilation, always accompanied by the energy's presence. Some dismissed it as stress, but others, like Evelyn, knew better. As tensions rose, Riggs convened a meeting in the command center. The room was cramped, filled with the uneasy buzz of voices. Engineers, scientists, and soldiers alike were present, their faces drawn and shadowed. "We need answers," Riggs began, his voice sharp. "This station is falling apart, systems failing, crew cracking under pressure. I need to know if this is something we can fix, or if we need to consider alternatives." The unspoken suggestion hung heavy in the air. To abandon Erebus Station would mean admitting defeat and leaving the energy unchecked. Dr. Sorensen spoke first. "We've never dealt with a force like this. It doesn't follow our understanding of physics. She faltered, searching for the words. "It's like it's learning from us." Evelyn nodded. "It's not just energy. It's sentient, or something close to it. I've been analyzing the patterns. They're too deliberate, too structured. This isn't random noise, it's communication." Jenna Corrigan leaned forward, her voice tinged with frustration. "If it's trying to talk, what the hell is it saying?" Evelyn hesitated. "I don't know, but I don't think it's a warning. I think it's a lure." The room fell silent. Then, as if in response to their fear, the station shuddered violently. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered. Riggs barked orders, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos. Evelyn grabbed a nearby console, her heart pounding as the station seemed to groan under some immense pressure. "Containment breach," Sorensen shouted, her voice high with panic. "The siphoning system's destabilizing." Evelyn rushed to the nearest monitor. The energy within the containment chamber was no longer a pulsing glow. It had coalesced into something almost physical, a shimmering, amorphous mass that writhed against the reinforced glass, probing for weakness. Riggs stared at the screen, his face a mask of grim determination. "Can we shut it down?" Sorensen shook her head. "Not without cutting life support. The systems are too integrated." Before Riggs could respond, a scream echoed through the corridors. The sound was raw, primal, and it sent a chill through everyone in the command center. Evelyn turned to Riggs, her voice trembling. "We're not alone." The source of the scream was Private Adrian Petrov, the same soldier who'd claimed to hear his mother's voice. They found him in the lower maintenance bay, his body curled into a fetal position. His eyes were wide and unfocused, his mouth moving silently. Evelyn knelt beside him, her fingers checking his pulse. "He's alive, but he's in shock." Riggs motioned for a medic, then turned to Evelyn. "What happened to him?" Evelyn's gaze drifted to the walls, where faint scorch marks marred the surface. "I think he saw it," she whispered. "Whatever's trying to reach us. He got too close?" Petrov's incoherent mumbling grew louder, his voice trembling. "It's coming. It's coming for us." The medic sedated him, but his final words hung in the air like a curse. Later, as Evelyn reviewed the containment footage, she saw something that made her blood run cold. For a split second, the energy had formed a shape, humanoid, indistinct but undeniably deliberate. It had turned toward the camera, its formless head tilting as if studying her. Evelyn leaned back, her breath shallow. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just learning. It was waiting, and it wasn't alone. Erebus Station was dying. The once sterile corridors now reeked of burnt metal and fear, while the faint hum of machinery was punctuated by the groans of failing systems. Omega 41's energy pulsed brighter than ever, casting shadows that seemed to twist and move on their own. Dr. Evelyn Marks sat alone in the station's dimly lit lab, her hands trembling as she sifted through hours of data. The patterns had become more complex, shifting beyond anything she could decipher with conventional methods. But there was no mistaking what she'd found. A sequence embedded within the fluctuations, repeated over and over. It was a message. The door hissed open, and Commander Harlan Riggs stepped in, his face drawn and weary. "Marks, the crew's on edge. 2 more soldiers are showing symptoms. Hearing voices, seeing things that aren't there. If we don't shut this down soon, we'll lose the whole station." Evelyn gestured to the screen, her voice tight with urgency. "We're not shutting it down. Not yet. Look." Riggs leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowing as he studied the display. The energies patterns had coalesced into a series of fractal shapes, impossibly intricate yet eerily symmetrical. "It's a warning," Evelyn said. "The energy isn't just adapting, it's trying to communicate. I think it's showing us what happened to the civilization that created it." Riggs shook his head. "You're making leaps, Doctor. We don't even know what this thing is." Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes blazing with determination. "It's not just energy, Riggs. It's a parasite, a living force that consumes and assimilates. The planet isn't natural. It's a containment vessel, built by a species that thought they could control it. They failed." Riggs stared at her, his jaw tightening. "And now it's targeting us?" Evelyn nodded. "Exactly. It's been testing us, wearing us down. Every malfunction, every nightmare, every whisper. It's not random. It's breaking us apart one by one." A sharp crackle erupted from the station's intercom, followed by the strained voice of Dr. Anika Sorensen. "Command Center to Riggs. We got a situation." Riggs grabbed his comm unit. "What is it?" Sorensen's voice was laced with panic. "Containment integrity is failing. The energy is destabilizing, and it's spreading." The two rushed to the command center, where chaos greeted them. Monitors displayed erratic readouts as containment alarms blared. The energy within the siphoning chamber had grown more volatile, its amorphous mass now forming distinct shapes, spindly appendages and shifting eyes that seemed to scan the room. Sorensen pointed to the readings. "The energies breached the inner barriers. If it reaches the main systems, it could compromise the entire station." Riggs turned to Evelyn. "You said it was a parasite. How do we stop it?" Evelyn hesitated, her mind racing. "The only way to contain it is to destroy the station. Overload the core and detonate it. The resulting energy surge should collapse whatever dimensional tether it's using to anchor itself here." Riggs' expression darkened. "Destroy the station? That's suicide." "We don't have a choice," Evelyn said, her voice resolute. "If it escapes, it won't stop here. It'll spread to Earth, and humanity won't stand a chance." Sorensen nodded reluctantly. "She's right. The energy is accelerating exponentially. We can't contain it much longer." The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. Riggs clenched his fists, his mind warring with the reality of the situation. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Fine. We evacuate the crew and set the core to overload. But no one gets left behind. Understood?" The team sprang into action, each member racing against the clock to prepare for evacuation. Evelyn and Sorensen worked to bypass the station's safety protocols and prime the core for detonation. Meanwhile, Riggs led his soldiers in securing the remaining crew. But the energy was no longer content to wait. As Evelyn worked at her console, a sudden chill washed over her. The lights flickered, and a low, resonant hum filled the room. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. A figure stood in the doorway, a humanoid shape formed entirely of energy. Its body flickered and pulsed, its face an ever-shifting void. It didn't move, yet Evelyn felt its presence pressing against her mind, probing her thoughts. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The entity tilted its head, as if considering her question. Then, without warning, images flooded her mind. A vast city of light reduced to ash, an entire species consumed by the parasite's hunger. She saw their desperation, their attempts to contain the force they had unleashed, and their ultimate failure. The vision ended as abruptly as it began, leaving Evelyn gasping for air. The entity dissolved into a swirling mist, disappearing as quickly as it had come. Sorensen grabbed her arm. "Evelyn, are you okay?" Evelyn shook her head, trying to steady herself. "It's showing me what it's capable of. It wants us to know what's coming if we fail." Before Sorensen could respond, the intercom crackled again. "Riggs to Marks. We got a problem." Some of the crew, his voice cut off, replaced by static. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Riggs? Come in." Static. Grabbing Sorensen, Evelyn bolted toward the command center. What they found was worse than anything she could have imagined. Several crew members were convulsing on the floor, their bodies surrounded by faint auras of energy. Their eyes glowed with the same light as Omega-41, and their movements were unnaturally jerky, as though controlled by unseen strings. Riggs stood over one of them, his weapon drawn but shaking. "They're not themselves," he said, his voice tight with anger and fear. Evelyn stepped forward cautiously. "The energy's taken them. It's using them as conduits." One of the affected crew members, Petrov, turned his head sharply toward Evelyn. His mouth twisted into an unnatural smile, and when he spoke, his voice was layered and human. "You cannot stop us. We are endless. We are inevitable." Riggs fired, and Petrov crumpled to the floor, his glow extinguished. But the others began to rise, their bodies twitching as the energy surged within them. "Fall back!" Riggs shouted, grabbing Evelyn and Sorensen. As they ran, Evelyn's mind raced. The parasite wasn't just feeding on them. It was consuming their will, their very essence. It was no longer confined to the containment chamber. It was spreading through the station, faster than she'd anticipated. Back in the lab, Evelyn stared at the core's countdown. There was no time left for evacuation. If they didn't act now, it would be too late. "We have to detonate," she said, her voice shaking. Riggs met her gaze, understanding the cost of her words. "Then we do it now." The control room was eerily quiet, the hum of failing systems the only sound as Evelyn Marks stared at the core's countdown. 10 minutes. That was all the time they had left before Erebus Station would obliterate itself, and hopefully the parasite along with it. Commander Riggs stood at her side, his face a mask of grim determination. Beside him, Dr. Sorensen worked frantically at a console, bypassing the station's emergency protocols to ensure the detonation couldn't be aborted. The weight of their decision pressed down on all of them, but there was no turning back. The remaining crew had been evacuated. At least, those who hadn't fallen victim to the parasite's influence. Evelyn tried not to think about the possessed crew members they had left behind. Their glowing eyes and twisted smiles burned into her memory. "They'll make it to the escape shuttles," Riggs said, as if sensing her thoughts. "They're trained for this." Evelyn nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. "And what about us?" Riggs gave her a tight smile. "We'll make it too." But Evelyn wasn't so sure. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a deep, resonant hum filled the room. Sorensen froze, her fingers hovering over the console. "It's here," she whispered. The parasite was no longer confined to the containment chamber. It had spread through the station's systems, corrupting everything it touched. The room seemed to pulse with its presence, shadows writhing across the walls as if alive. "Keep working," Riggs barked. "We're finishing this." Sorensen's hands moved over the console with renewed urgency. Evelyn turned her attention to the monitors, where the parasite's energy swirled in chaotic patterns. It was trying to stop them, she realized. The parasite wasn't just a mindless force. It was intelligent, calculating, and desperate to survive. The intercom crackled, and a voice emerged, layered and distorted. It was both familiar and alien, the voices of their possessed crew blending into a single, chilling chorus. "You cannot destroy us," the parasite said. "We are infinite. Your sacrifice will mean nothing." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. "You're wrong," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You're not infinite. You're trapped, and we're going to make sure you stay that way." The parasite's response was a low, guttural laugh that seemed to reverberate through the station. Then the room erupted into chaos. The energy surged, and the shadows coalesced into shapes, humanoid figures that moved with unnatural speed. Riggs fired his weapon, the sharp cracks echoing in the confined space. The energy forms flickered but didn't falter, advancing with relentless purpose. "Go!" Riggs shouted. "I'll hold them off." Evelyn hesitated, her heart pounding. "You can't fight them alone." "Don't argue, Marks," Riggs said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Finish the job." Tears stung her eyes as she turned and ran, Sorensen close behind. The corridor outside the control room was dark, the emergency lights casting a faint red glow. The station groaned around them, the parasite's influence spreading like a cancer. They reached the reactor chamber, where the core's pulsating light bathed the room in an otherworldly glow. Sorensen immediately began inputting the final override codes, her fingers flying over the console. Evelyn stood guard, her eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. "We're almost there," Sorensen said, her voice tight with concentration. "Just a few more seconds." But the parasite wasn't done. The energy surged through the chamber, and the temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the walls and consoles as the air grew heavy with an unnatural chill. Evelyn's breath came in shallow gasps, her body trembling from more than just the cold. Then she saw it. The entity materialized in the center of the room, its form shifting and flickering like a mirage. It was larger now, more defined, with limbs that stretched impossibly long and a face that was nothing but a void. It moved towards Sorensen, its presence oppressive and suffocating. Evelyn acted on instinct. She grabbed a nearby pipe and swung it at the entity. The pipe passed through its form, meeting no resistance, but the distraction was enough to draw its attention. The void where its face should have been turned toward her, and Evelyn felt an overwhelming pressure in her mind, as if the parasite were trying to consume her thoughts. "You are nothing," it said, its voice filling her head. "You cannot stop us." Evelyn gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stand her ground. "Maybe not," she said, her voice shaking. "But we can slow you down." Behind her, Sorensen shouted, "It's done." The core is set to overload. The entity let out a deafening screech, its form dissolving into a swirling mass of energy. Evelyn grabbed Sorensen's arm, pulling her toward the exit. "Come on," she yelled. They ran through the station's crumbling corridors, the parasite's energy lashing out around them. Sparks flew from broken consoles, and the walls groaned as the structure began to collapse. They reached the escape shuttle bay just as the station's automated voice announced the core's imminent detonation. Evelyn and Sorensen scrambled aboard the last shuttle, slamming the hatch shut behind them. "Launch it!" Evelyn shouted. Sorensen hit the controls, and the shuttle's engines roared to life. They shot away from the station, the force of the acceleration pressing them into their seats. Through the viewport, Evelyn watched as Erebus Station shrank into the distance, its lights flickering like a dying star. Then, with a blinding flash, the station exploded. The shockwave rocked the shuttle, and Evelyn shielded her eyes from the brilliant light. When it faded, all that remained was silence. Evelyn slumped back in her seat, her body trembling with exhaustion. Sorensen sat beside her, staring out the viewport with a dazed expression. "Did it work?" Sorensen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She watched the swirling remnants of the explosion, searching for any sign of the parasite. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, she saw it, a flicker of light, distant but unmistakable. Her heart sank. The parasite wasn't gone. It had survived. Evelyn closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. They had bought humanity time, but the battle was far from over. And deep down, she knew the parasite would return.